Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Monday, November the 14th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, we have, just as a heads up, we recorded this afternoon our weekly podcast with Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda, and it was a good post game show, if you will, about the elections. We were talking about different things that happened on election day. But one of the most interesting things that Bill brought up, and I was somewhat familiar with this, but I know more about it now because he brought it up. In New York, because of the campaign that Lee Zeldin ran for governor, Lee Zeldin ran a really good campaign for governor, came within 4 or 5 points of becoming the governor of New York. The only reason he didn't win was because of the Democrats' lock on New York City. I mean, the Democrats, they control New York City to such a degree that they can get the vote out in New York City, not in the rest of the state, but in New York City. So it was enough of a lock to give the governor a 4 to 5 point lead to win the governorship of New York. But Lee Zeldin, in his campaign and focusing so much on crime, ended up electing 4 new members of Congress from the state of New York who are now going to be Republican. Now, 4 new members of Congress is a very big deal because that could be, in fact, the majority or the reason for the majority in the U.S. House, and that's still being worked on. But so that is a great point that Bill brought up, the impact that Lee Zeldin's campaign had on the country. And now Zeldin has become a real Republican personality, if you will. I'm not sure if he's still a member of Congress. Maybe he left Congress to run for governor. But I tell you, I hope that he runs for the U.S. Senate in 2024. There is a seat in the U.S. Senate available there in New York. But Lee Zeldin has really become a real hero in the Republican Party for what he did. Well, the way it stands right now, looking at the election right now, nothing, of course, is different in the Senate because that still is right now 50-49 until what happens in Georgia. And at that point, it's either going to be 51-49 or it's going to be 50-50, whatever happens in Georgia. But over in the House, it does appear that the Republicans are inching closer and closer to having a majority. The last time I checked, they had 217. They would need 218 to have technically a majority. Some of the estimates that I've seen are that the Republicans are going to win something like 220, 221. So that would give them a majority of about 10 votes in the House of Representatives. It's not a big majority, but it's a majority. In fact, I think it's about the same size as the majority that the Democrats have right now in the House of Representatives. So it's not going to be big, but it's going to be enough to have a majority. And when you're the majority party in the House, well, you get to name the committee chairman, you get to pick what the agenda is going to be. And obviously, as a majority party, you have influence on what legislation moves on to the Senate. Remember, the president, whatever he proposes, goes to the House first, and then it goes to the Senate. So it has to get out of the House before it goes to the Senate. And with a Republican majority, I don't see a lot of the Biden legislation getting to the Senate. So the Republicans are going to have a lot of power with that majority in the House, even though it is a small majority, but it is a majority. So that's a good thing to have. Now, one of the big, and this is an embarrassment for the United States. I don't know how else to say it, but these states who are still counting votes, I don't understand how that can be. And I really think that we need to look into this. Now, I understand that elections are run by the states. I understand that. I get that. And it should stay that way. But I think that federal elections, that there should be some uniformity across the country. When you're running for the House, when you're running for the Senate, those are federal positions, and there ought to be some uniformity in the country when it comes to that. The idea that a week after, 1 week after the election, we're still counting votes in California, and some of those elections, they've only counted like 60% of the vote. I mean, where's the other 40%? What is going on? You're talking about a district. You're not talking about the state of California. You're talking about a district where there ought to be some regional, integrity in that district. And the idea that we're still counting votes in some of these districts, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I think the reason that this is happening is because over the last 20 years or so, in many places, we have moved away from voting on election day. And we have all these alternative ways of voting by mail. You put the mail here, you send it here, you do this and you do that. And the consequence of all of this is that it's more difficult to find the votes because the votes are coming in different ways. And I like what we have in Texas. What we have in Texas is you have 2 weeks of early voting. So for 2 weeks, you can vote in person, and then election day, of course. And if you cannot vote in person, then there is something called absentee, where you have to fill out a form and explain why you're not able to vote in person, travel, sick, or whatever it may be, and you can vote that way. But on election day, all the votes are in. All the votes are counted on election day. And that's not saying that there isn't going to be an election that is too close to call, that maybe goes late into the night or whatever. That can happen. But at least the votes are being counted. At least you're talking about 99, 98% of the vote counted. Some of these counties in California, some of these districts, they're like 60% counted. I mean, what the heck is that all about? So I think they got to look into that. I really do, because we're not looking good. Something else, too, that I think is absolutely shameful. And I'm going to blame this one on the media, because the media could have done something about this, but they didn't. In Arizona, the lady who was running for governor was the incumbent Secretary of State. Now, what that means is that the lady who's running for governor is the lady responsible for counting the votes. That is a conflict of interest. That is so huge of a conflict of interest that I'm truly amazed. I am truly amazed that it didn't become a scandal, or that the media didn't look into it. That is a scandal. I don't care what party you're talking about. If you're running for governor, you shouldn't be the person responsible for counting the votes. I'm not saying that you're going to do anything wrong. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't look good, and it creates all kinds of problems. Now, my understanding is that in Mariposa County in Arizona, they're going to have all kinds of problems with machines and all of that. So that election, even though it has been called for Katie Hobbs, I think that's her name, I don't believe Carrie Lake has conceded, and she shouldn't concede. I think there has to be an explanation for what happened, why all of a sudden they ran out of paper ballots on election day. That stuff has to be accounted for. You can't just write stuff up like that. But it is an embarrassment for the United States to have elections conducted in that fashion. We didn't always do that. Go back 20 years, we didn't have this problem. We go back 30 years, we didn't have this problem. We were able to vote on election day and count the votes on election day. It's not that complicated to do it, especially with all the technology we have right now. I mentioned before how in Brazil, 150 million people voted in Brazil. 150 million people voted in Brazil 2 weeks ago, and they had the vote counted by 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, in the evening. There's no excuse for these delays. And I think that we need to take a very good look at what happened in some of these recounts. And I hope that the legislatures of the states that I'm talking about, California, Arizona, some of these other states, they got to check this out, because they're not looking good. They're not looking good when stuff like this happens in their states. One last thing I wanted to mention. One of the reasons that the Democrats did so well in this campaign, or certainly kept the red wave back, is because many young people voted Democrat. In fact, if you look at the demarcation being the age of 30, people over 30 voted Republican. People under 30 voted overwhelmingly for the Democrats. And the reason that so many young people voted Democrat is because the universities and many of the young people were mobilized around the idea that the federal government was going to cancel their credits, their college credits, and they were going to cancel that or give them some kind of a waiver so that they wouldn't have to pay the whole thing. Well, that's why they voted for that, and that's one of the reasons so many of them voted Democrat. Well, it turns out that particular executive order that was signed by President Biden has now been found to be unconstitutional by two different federal courts. So the executive order is going nowhere. And this loan forgiveness program is never going to happen. And these young people who invested all their energies and all their hopes on the president of the United States bailing them out of some very bad economic decisions that they made. Nobody forced them to get these loans. Um, Now they're going to have to, I guess they're going to have to pay them back, which is a good thing for them. They should pay it back. But it once again shows you that when you got people out there pandering for votes, that there are people are actually falling for this. It amazes me that people actually fell for this idea that the president of the United States was going to bail you out and cancel your loan. I mean, there should have been people at these universities explaining to many of these young people, you know what, the president cannot do that. The president cannot do that, so don't fall for this. But too many of them did. Maybe the real problem is that too many of our young people do not understand our Constitution, and they actually think that a president can forgive your college loans. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. We're going to stay on top of the elections because, as I said, it looks like the GOP is going to win the House, and Speaker McCarthy is going to be the new speaker, and that's a good thing. I like him. And we'll see what happens with the Senate. That's a couple of weeks into the future. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.